Right, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So, a few weeks ago, I did a stream with Mitch. Actually, probably more than a few weeks now. I did a stream with Mitch on the real historical aspects of the video game Kingdom Come Deliverance, set in 1403, early 15th century Bohemia. At a time just before the Hussite Wars. This is a time when you had a uh, conflicts off and on again between the two half brothers, King Wenceslaus of Bohemia and uh, King of the Romans and Holy Roman Emperor, and then his half brother, um, King Sigismund of Hungary and Croatia, who also who kidnapped King Wenceslaus and tried to wrestle control of the empire towards himself. We talked about that aspect, what the events around that, and the ultimate foreshadowing of um, the Hussite Wars, which both kings would be affected one way or another by it. And so today I'm joined by Mitch. How are you, Mitch?
Yeah, I didn't know what. Same old, yeah.
Yeah, and so Mitch, we're now going to be going into the Hussite Wars itself, and it was a uh, quite an interesting conflict to do a bit of research in. So for me, looking into it, the famous thing is these Hussite war wagons that a lot of people like Iron Duke and stuff, that what they're aware about is the war wagons the Hussites used, mainly because they didn't have the numerical advantage that their opponents in the various German counts and um, Hungarian, the coalition of Catholic forces, um, and also this was the first time, I guess. I don't want to say um, guns or anything, but some form of like hand cannon was used on a mass scale in this conflict.
Yeah, it's like the word howitzer actually comes from the Czech word hufnitzer, literally mean. I think it literally translates like gun that fires against a crowd, because I think the word hoof means crowd in Czech, and of course these cannons would be mounted onto the wagons to fire at these enemy knights to coax them to charge, almost in the same way that the French would have charged it towards that, say, battles like Agincourt, and then it becomes a position where the cavalry charges and they just get torn piecemeal by crossbowmen who've got the cover of the wagons. And if any knight were to get into the wagonberg, he'll be cut down, seeing as he'll be exhausted and isolated. So you generally get the gist that Jan Žižka and all the other and a lot of the Hussite generals generally very adaptive, very. I mean, some people reckon that you could argue that the tank, in some ways, had inspiration from the Hussite war wagons of that time. So very like
Yeah,
a lot of the
um,
Hussites were very revolutionary, and so it was a mode of warfare.
yeah. I'm just going to share an image so people viewing can have a. I mean, this is a contemporary at the time. You could probably find better, but effectively, this is how, from my understanding, they would have like rows of eight on these wagons. You would have your crossbow, you then have your cannon, and you'd also have a few men, maybe with maces or spears or swords or something, just to um, act as like a barrier. And yeah, and the way that this would be, they would form is it'd basically be like squares. It would be on the battlefield. It would be like a square formation, which, as we'll see in battles, that you I mean, there's one battle here where the death toll on the Catholic forces side sits around, what was it, like, nearly up with about 1,000 or so, and the Hussite side, Mitch, was about I think like between 40 and 60, which is
Yeah,
quite good.
very similar kill to death ratios as akin to a Battle of Cressy. Yeah, it's a very similar kill to death ratio that the English longbowmen enjoyed under the likes of Edward the Black Prince and Henry V. So, and
Yeah,
even though,
yes,
I, yeah, and that's the thing. Like the Hussites, they were generally the underdog because they only had like Bohemia. Then there's the fact that most of these Hussite soldiers were generally peasants, like carpenters and the like. So they were skilled at, under good direction, were able to build up these wagon birds to be impenetrable. But that also came at the sense of, oh yeah, these average Hussite soldiers didn't have any training, unlike the mounted knights that Sigismund would send against said Hussites. And especially when you factor that Jan Žižka was such a talented general, they never lost a battle, you generally get the sense that, yeah, it's. But the Hussites,
yeah. I mean, yeah,
very ingenious.
I was saying Jan Žižka was, again, he never lost a battle. Quite similar to, I was ashamed because I totally blanked out when I was streaming with Hitman on Alexander the Great. I was thinking of anyone else who lost a battle, and or someone who never actually lost a battle. And yeah, Jan Žižka was one of them. He never lost a battle, which he was involved with. And I mean, the one thing that a lot of pan-Slavonists like to use as a sort of folk hero for the Slavs, especially fighting against the Germans, is the Battle of Gernwald in 1410 against the Teutonic Knights, and you had the coalition of the Polish, Lithuanian, Bohemian, Silesians, and so on against the Teutonic Knights. And from my understanding, I don't think that there's evidence to suggest that he was present on the battlefield, but he didn't actually take part in the battle itself. If that he wasn't actually involved with it, but he was involved with various skirmishes after the fact with the Teutonic Knights, but not on that. But he was present at the time in the campaigns. But I mean, Jan Žižka is probably the one that, for many Czechs, he is that a very important figure. I mean, to the point is during the Velvet Revolution, when the communist government was ousted in '89, his statue became I guess, like a sort of focal point for the demonstrators.
Yeah, I believe
Yeah,
at the time a lot of Hussite. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say it's quite and a lot of Czechs today, nationalist Czechs, like to invoke him because of the as we'll see. This conflict isn't it's not so much the religious. There's actually quite a strong ethnic compilation to it. Sorry, Mitch, continue.
Yeah, as I say, the thing about Jan Žižka was a lot of the soldiers actually came to regard him as almost like a father as well, which is like so. I can't remember which precise year he dies in the midst of a conflict, but when he dies, that's seen as a big demoralizing blow because you can imagine, similar to when the Macedonians were told of Alexander the Great's death, like very demoralizing because this guy had commanded you through so many victories, and Jan Žižka himself was quite an underdog because I think it was something like when he was young, he lost one eye, and then in the midst of his service in the Hussite revolt, in the Hussite revolution, however you should call it, ended up losing his other eye. So the last few years of his life, he was still winning quite a few battles, even though he was fully blind. So it's kind of like, similar to John the Blind at Cressy, who, despite being blind, he was actually the most successful element. So kind of a parallel there.
Yeah, there is, and yeah. So we'll get into we'll make a start with just give a brief overview. So during I guess you could say the early turn of the 15th century, Europe the Catholic Europe was split, and you had the Western Schism, as it's known as. First, it started with an anti-pope in Avignon and a pope in Rome. There later was a pope arose in Pisa. So you had this split, and it's quite interesting, Mitch, looking into it, that this caused one of the delays in both Wenceslaus' official coronation as Holy Roman Emperor and also Sigismund, because only the Pope, you can get the title King of the Romans and Holy Roman Emperor, but to be actually officiated as Holy Roman Emperor, it can only be delivered by the Pope. So this is why Wenceslaus, it's a bit confusing. Sometimes he's referred to as Holy Roman Emperor, other times it's just King of the Romans. I mean, going technically, he was just King of the Romans, but there were also other people, as we discussed last time, like Albert of the Palatinate, who um, sorry, not Albert, Rupert of the Palatinate, even, who declared himself king of the Romans. So there was a bit of, and this was because of the Western Schism and the split of each kingdom's support for each pope. From my understanding, Wenceslaus and the House of Luxembourg as a whole, um, including Sigismund in Hungary, didn't remain somewhat neutral. They wouldn't declare for one side or the other. Um, and this during this time, you had, as I said last time, during this time, Jan Hus, who was a professor at the Prague University in theology, was heavily influenced by John Wycliffe, who was a critic of the Catholic Church's teachings of indulgences, and various theological interpretations from the Bible, which would branded him as a heretic. And Jan Hus was very much interested in that, especially on the topic of indulgences, which ironically was what influenced Martin Luther over 100 years later. But yeah, and one thing that Jan Hus was able to do in his preachings and his teachings in Prague is he was able to tap into the sentiment in the kingdom among the native Czechs, the feeling that the German domination of institutions in the realm was a symptom of what's wrong within the church, and there was a strong anti-German feeling, that there was these unfavorable and unequal aspects to the sort of German dominance in Bohemia. This resulted in him being on several occasions being reprimanded, and he would then go into the countryside itself, and him and his followers would go into the countryside of Bohemia, where he garnered a lot of support, and among the rural peasantry, and even aspects of the gentry and the lower nobilities, people who were and sirs and counts and stuff. So he had this and low level lords, and he built up. There was effectively this, among these small parish priests, there would be like this network of Jan Hus's teachings, and one thing that he was able to do was he was very critical of the behaviors of the those in the Catholic Church who, I guess you could say, were not following their own advice when it came to aspects of indulgences, and yeah, this was and as I said, ultimately on this was on a strong anti-German sentiment. Do you have anything else to add, Mitch?
Yeah, because thinking about what Bohemia was, I think it was only I can't remember precisely which century it was. Probably could be 11th century or perhaps something like 13th century. But I mean, you had Bohemia declare itself as a kingdom, but the thing was they were just massively outnumbered by the Germans, like all surrounded all over the western frontier by the likes of Bavarians and Saxons, like in northern Germany and so on. So there was that sort of siege mentality for a time, but there's also, yeah, and generally, like most Germans, kind of looked upon the Bohemians like weird people, like just oh yeah, but like they drink beer and all the rest of it, but they just don't speak the same language. And I suppose that inspires a sense of otherness within the Bohemians. Like they always feel that, even though they're in the same union as a lot of these German groups, they just feel aloof and left out. So that eventually culminates into something akin to the Hussite Wars. Because the thing is, that's one way the Hussite Wars originated was on one hand this Czech desire, like this Bohemian desire to be like rebelling against this German-dominated Holy Roman Empire in a way, but it's also a whole lot of other factors all culminated alongside the nationalist desires. Like you have the religious side, which, as you said, yeah, I'm not massively knowledgeable about like the nuances of religion, so you probably know more about what Jan Hus taught than I would ever do. But you just generally get the gist that the Bohemians they've always been aloof. They didn't like the German-dominated clergy, and also you got. I'm going. Yeah, and also like with Bohemians, like because you look at a lot of the middle class, they would have had to learn German. Like it's obligatory for them to learn German because none of the Germans would learn the Czech language. It was a sort of situation where I suppose I don't know how best to tell it, but it's like, oh yeah, the Czechs they have to do all these many obligations, have to do all these manner of requirements, and always like they have to do so much effort to like try and fit in. But whereas the Germans never really reciprocated, I suppose I don't know how best to term it, but it's like yeah, it's like similar to how, like for example, the Dutch have to learn both German and English back then because no one would learn their language. So that kind of puts somewhat a bit of resentment. I don't know how best to term it.
I mean, what's quite interesting is one thing I also found is that during the Hussite Wars, even though Poland was never, there was never the Polish, many not many Poles really. I mean, what's to be honest, Poland was never embroiled in all this. They never sort of agreed with the sort of Reformation idea. They never wasn't on a religious level, weren't affected. But a lot of Poles, and I just brought up a map here. So this is the crown lands of Bohemia. So the Kingdom of Bohemia, as it was then, is here. So you got Bohemia itself in the south here. You got Moravia, which was the Duchy of Moravia. Up north you got Silesia, and then you got Upper Listia and Lower Listia, which is basically the Mesian. This is the German. That's the German territory there. Mesian lords. And Silesia itself, which historically had been under the Kingdom of Poland, acquired by the Crown of Bohemia, and so you had a very large Polish population living in Bohemia, along with the sizable German population, as you mentioned, and then of course the sort of Slovak Moravian population to the south. Um, and it's quite interesting looking into the uh, e- how each group interacted.
Yeah, you can imagine. Yeah, because you got the case of like the average Bohemian peasant or the average Bohemian merchant. Like, if you, in other words, like if you wanted to get anywhere, you kind of had to go through a lot. You had there was a lot more hoops for you, like a lot more hurdles compared to, let's say, a German fella. In the sense that, okay, if you, as let's say, you were born in Prague, to do anything, you probably would have had to learn German to communicate with merchants and a lot of craftsmen over in Germany. So, for reasons of trade within the empire, you'd have had to learn German. If you want to speak with nobility, you would have had to learn French because that was always the international language back then. If you wanted to do anything religious, everything was done in Latin. So you also had to learn Latin.
Yes.
And I believe, yeah, and yeah, you just generally just that. Oh yeah, the Bohemians were always this one group who were, as I don't know the best term to describe, but it's essentially it's like they always felt aloof, almost isolated. I mean, in a sense, yeah, the Bohemians probably would get on better with the Polish, but unlike the Polish, they're within the Holy Roman Empire. They're not independent from it,
Well,
and
I was
that's
going to say, yeah, I was going to say because with the acquisition of Silesia about, I think it was about 100 years earlier, you did have a lot of ethnic Poles living in Bohemia, um, uh, in Silesia. That was. Also, it's important to note, Mitch, that within of course, this comes on the back of the Black Death, and I got a map here in person, and if you look at it, one thing that's quite interesting is Central Europe, particularly Bohemia, wasn't as badly affected by both on sort of population and economic scale of the Black Death compared to parts of Germany, England, France, and um, other nations within Western Europe. And so the wealth of Bohemia and the strength of it uh, is also a result of that as well, especially when you had the emergence of. It's quite interesting because on the map here that it refers to the the post uh, Black Death as the as political and cultural um, centers of Europe went eastwards into Prague, into Poland, into Lithuania. That these emerging, these powerful states would come to dominate or play a more important role in European and church politics going forward.
yeah. You had I mean, I mean, last time we mentioned Charles IV, who was also generally seen as kind of like a father of Prague because he built up a university, built up, he pretty much built up the entire city of Prague for the most part, and he's generally looked upon Czechs as being sort of like the Czech version of Alfred the Great from what I've read of him. So, so you
Yeah, I
generally
mean,
get the gist that yeah, you generally get the gist that in the mid 14th to late 14th century, up until of course the into like the wars between Wenceslaus and Sigismund, Bohemia was doing pretty well. I mean, there's also the fact that very industrial area as well. A lot of because you got the silver mines at Kutna Hora, I believe, or like in that area. So you generally
yeah,
get the gist that Bohemia is a materially blessed as well, and along with the lands I've got in Silesia, which are also quite developed, akin like kind of like a Slavic version of Benelux as well.
yeah. Yeah, you had in Bohemia, you had the silver mines, you had iron, you had also just the fields, you had the agriculture to go with it. So it was kind of a good mix of all, and also the forest, lots of on the economic side, wood and it was a wealthy kingdom, and they had a royal army. The Royal Army of Bohemia was, I believe, it was the large at this time. It was the largest army in the Holy Roman Empire out of all the other. sort of armies within the states. It was a very, very powerful, and they also were as I mentioned, I think before the stream, they were the first ones to use hand cannons. One of the first ones, the first to employ the use of hand cannons, which would in Eastern Europe, of course, places like Italy and the Eastern Romans. Well, the Eastern Romans, I think, were probably one of the first Europeans to use, um, you know, gunpowder based weapons.
Yeah, and you also I think like the thing I mean Bohemia was also another thing to know is that as an elector of the Roman Empire, like the Holy Roman Empire, they had a lot of political influence, but because they were were sort of the biggest, because I mean, I suppose you had Austria, but the Habsburgs hadn't fully consolidated all the lands we consider Austria today, so they weren't as powerful as they'd later be. I suppose, I mean, you got all the other, I mean, the smaller ones, like the Palatinate and city of Cologne, and you got Brandenburg, which up until the Hohenzollern dynasty was largely a pigsty rather than the Duchy of Prussia we know in history to be. So you generally get just that Bohemia has also got a lot more clout, especially after the Black Death. I didn't know originally. I know Poland, for example, they didn't get hit by the Black Death, but that's because it actually closed their borders and prevented said Black Death from ever coming in. So I know
It's
that.
quite interesting because Mitch, I was looking I think the reason why I'm looking online now. One of the reasons suggested, this is why I checked, the reason why the Black Death didn't hit Poland, didn't hit the Bohemia and Moravia, was because the road networks weren't, because it was King Charles who developed the road networks, bridges, and everything, but because the access in was so poor or limited, that it hampered movement. And in a similar move, a lot of just towns, because they were isolated, you had a lot of forests, so it was easy for them to basically shut down the border, sort of thing, and prevent people coming back and forth. And it also looks like a lot of Eastern Europe was more self-sufficient, so there wasn't much in the way of trade compared if you were to compare it to England and France. You had the Hanseatic League in the Baltic, and so that would explain maybe the spread of the plague quickly in those sorts of areas. But I mean, Eastern Europe. Uh, I mean, Russia. It's interesting because Russia it came in waves. It was again, it wasn't like a singular um, you know, event. It was came in sort of different parts, but again, sparsely populated. Because of the wasn't as connected, it sort of helped them to help the population to wither the worst aspects of it.
Yeah, I always have a yeah, I always have. I mean, because Black Plague was around 1350, I believe. So I
Yeah,
would have thought I would have thought Charles the Fourth. I would have thought he would have developed Bohemia enough that it would have made it susceptible. Because as you said, like you've got the Hanseatic League now. The thing about England in the Middle Ages was even in like 1066, it's like we were the second country in Europe to be like mining coins after the Eastern Roman Empire. So you generally get the gist that for every Middle Ages is generally England is a prosperous. I always thought that Bohemia would also. I mean, I suppose like
I don't-
Bohemia is
I
a lot more rugged land
oh
compared to
I
England.
I don't think Charles the Fourth was ruler. I think his father was the ruler of Bohemia at that time. During the first wave of the Black Death, which was the more sort of deadly one that people think about. That was it 1340, 1350. I don't think
No,
he was.
I thought he was ruling every time. I could be wrong because I keep thinking like he reigned for. I mean, Oh yeah, he reigned in 1355. Oh, I thought he was 1350 around that time because I remember he
Yeah,
reigned for a long time by medieval standards. Anyway, he reigned for something like 1355 to 1378. I thought it was something like 1345 to 1478 or something like that. So
yeah.
got my
I
got it.
think because what was quite interesting is that there was a quick recovery, and I think the golden age was kind of a reference not just to his building and the building and using the wealth to build up infrastructure and create sort of icons of culture, but also it was like a coming out of the sort of plague and the the Mongol raids and what have you. And I think a big part of that was uh, the sort of legacy of that. But anyway, we'll get into the first bit because we're nearly half an hour in. So um, we'll start off with this, Mitch. So we're starting off with the Council of Constance. So we're given the introduction of Jan Hus, who he was. He built up a lot of support in Bohemia and Moravia um, as the main two among the native Slavic populations there. Um, and in I believe it was 1413, Mitch. Sigismund called a council called the council what was called the Council of Constance, which was an assembly of all high ranking officials in the secular world and the religious world to meet and to hash out the schism, various topics, um, aspects of church doctrine, the schism itself, and also Jan Hus and the Hussite movement. Because unlike other previous, I guess the church would define them as heretical movement, Jan Hus had like as I talked about, like it was kind of like a very strong network of on the ground people in in villages, in the towns. He had various merchants, intellectuals. He wasn't like some you know small time cult leader. This was he had quite a hold over the country, um, and this was I mean Wenceslaus was originally quite I wouldn't say favorable, but he gave Jan Hus a lot of he sort of did paid lip service to Jan Hus and the Hussite movement. He agreed in principle the condemnation that Jan Hus was inflicting on the church of hypocrisy and so on. And in 1415, because this council went on for a few years, I think it went on from 1413 to 1418. In 1415, an invitation, Sigismund invited Jan Hus to the council under safe conduct. And Jan Hus, he arrived at the council with some followers. One of them was Jerome of Prague, who was another quite a senior, important figure in the early Hussite movement. And uh, hold on a sec. Yeah, and when he arrived, Jan Hus was imprisoned, and he was tried and executed on the 6th of July in 1415, which was a bit of a shocking move because Wenceslaus and other Czech and other nobles, even German nobles, were a bit surprised of the move that was done. In response, the knights and nobles of Bohemia and Moravia, who were in favor of church reform, even those who were even somewhat critical of Jan Hus, but also again more acknowledging the fact of the German dominance within the realm, sent the I guess like a written condemnation called the Protestio Bohemium to the Council of Constance on the 2nd of September 1415, which condemned the execution of Huss in the strongest language. This, of course, would go on to really anger Sigismund, who at this point was already titled King of the Romans, and was seeking reconciliation in the church so he could be officially crowned as Holy Roman Emperor, because at this point he wasn't. And this also angered Wenceslaus a bit, because this was seen as I think there was an element that he because he wasn't able to contain Jan Hus and his nobles, that this was it made him appear even weaker than he was. And as we mentioned in the previous stream, Wenceslaus wasn't a competent ruler at all. He was a very, very poor king, incredibly poor king. He just wasn't good in any sort of sense of governance.
Yeah, it's like I mean, in the case of Constance, it was a matter of, I believe it was Pope Martin I can't remember which number, which I think it was Pope Martin the sixth or fourth. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, he was the main one gung ho about killing off Jan Hus, as well as he was also gung ho about killing off the Lollards in England as well. So he was trying to wipe a slate clean with all these like heretics. Whereas Sigismund, who was a guarantor of Jan Hus, he was sidelined, like, in terms of, because he was very enraged when he saw Jan Hus imprisoned a month back in June 1415. However, as it Backcouncil was there to sort out the schism, Sigismund, of course, he was wanted to be crowned Holy Roman Emperor, but he needed papal approval. But
yeah, and well, because he was persuaded that Huss was a heretic, and I believe, I don't know if it was joint between the half brothers, between Wenceslaus and Sigismund, but I think it was Sigismund. He sent letters to the Bohemian nobility and the town burghers and stuff, declaring that he would what was the word, like he would wipe out or drown out Hussites and Whitecliffites and sympathizers, which then angered, which I mean, because the reaction to the execution, because it wasn't just Jan Hus, it was also Jerome of Prague who was executed. Again, a bit on jumped up charges, I think, just because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But all of this angered the and this resulted in many of the rural towns and villages in Bohemia to cause mass sort of like mob action, rioting, or just like taking over of bits. So I mean, Mitch, we talked about Kingdom Come Deliverance, the game setting. So for instance, in that one, in Sasau, the part of the game where there's this I think it's an Augustine monastery, or no, Benedictine monastery. In real life, at this time, it was attacked by sort of pro-Hussite mob, and you even had in Ulitz, you had the priest who in like in other towns and villages, you had Catholic priests who were driven from their parishes, or some of them sort of converting in the sense of siding with the Hussite faction. And the thing there is,
oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, carry on, Mitch.
I was going to say, it went really chaotic at that time. I think Wenceslaus actually died of a heart attack or he died of natural causes.
Well,
There's arguments on that, but yeah, he died around
oh,
that
sorry.
time. Yeah.
Sorry. Hold on. We will get to that. He doesn't die at this point. Well, you are right. We are coming up to it. It's the events of Prague and defenestration of Prague which triggered that. That
Oh,
his
I thought it was. I can't. I mean, my mind's a bit warped. So I'm trying to remember what happened first: the defenestration or the death of Wenceslas. I know.
It was the
Yeah, sorry.
So what happened was you had the civil disorder in the countryside, as we have here, where a lot of Catholic priests were driven from the parishes. A lot of Germans were being expelled as well. So one good example is in again, I'm sort of sorry, I'm referring back to the game, but in Sasau, the town's merchant, like the town council, the town merchant council, all dominated by mainly German characters. That they're all mainly German, right? Um,
Yeah,
the sort of wealthiest citizens, and then the countryside peasantry and maybe even like the local scribe and like lesser intellectuals, and then and uh, the the monks are native Czechs, and so what you have is this this the, the start of all this. There was, I mean, yes, they were attacking the aspects of the church, but also inadvertently or at the same time it was also targeting largely German Catholic Germans.
yeah.
um
You can say like it had a very But I mean, on one hand, you can. I mean, you strong. There's a strong argument to be said for like the religion. I mean, because this is a day before modern day nationalism as we conceive it. So they saw religion as a way of going, oh well, ethnic grudges on part of Czechs against the Germans in that
it, it
historical period. So
it's quite interesting
because
because
it's kind of
A lot of Czech nationalists, you say that a lot of Czech nationalists today will hearken this as like their national awakening. But also, do you know who else, Mitch, used the Hussite Wars and this sort of movement as an inspiration? Is of course the people like Marx and Engels. I think Marx even talked about the Hussites or the Taborites in particular, the more radical wing of the Hussites, as like a proto-communist element, and that's why a lot of films I think there's a few films out there in from like the 60s and 70s by the Czech, which was produced by the Czech government, which was they were more happy enough to do because there was if you watch it, it's okay, but there's a lot of like communist, you talking points in there.
yeah,
um
it'd be like analogous. It's like, let's say you had the British Communist government making a film about the levelers in the time of Cromwell. So that's kind of
yeah, that's how it would
is
be presented. Yeah. um I mean, there's one out there called, I think it's Jan Ziska. There's like a trilogy, and it's okay. I mean, it's not bad or anything. It's pretty good, you know. But there is you just have to sort of like drown your mind out to a lot of like the sort of comrade communist uh, aspects to it. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people, a lot of different groups use this as inspiration for motivating the workers or thing. But I would say, looking at it, it was quite nationalistic in its inception. um uh
yeah.
yeah, so uh, yeah, sorry, carry on, Mitch.
As I say, it's like some people will hearken to Agincourt as being like the 100 Years' War period as being like the sort of ethnogenesis of the English in some ways, and they go, I mean that's up for debate. I mean, but it's like, I mean, it's only the 19th century when you start having this sense of national, like sense of nationalism blossoming. Like for example, you have Czechs who lobby for independence amidst the First World War, like much later on, where so I don't know, I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah, it's like, on one hand, yeah, they can look. It's like in medieval Europe, you generally used religion as a byproduct of talking about ethnicity. Like, if you talk about Muslims back then, you would be thinking of non-Europeans, or that. And in the case of Hussites, they would go, "Oh well, anyone who's not Hussite," like they immediately think the Germans, who are a group of people who we are accustomed to, but also like aloof from, and there's like just general culmination of hostile reaction because just I don't know if you'd be too strong to say resentment, but you can generally have like these long boiling tensions that have been a long time in the making, just culminating into this brief like element of chaos before it inevitably spoils off into war. In case of Hussites.
Yeah, I mean, no, that is true. And what's quite interesting is continue on this is that during this uprising in towns and villages, Prague experiences aspects of these uprising public demonstrations. And what you have is you have these two factions within, because of course Jan Hus and Jerome of Prague, who were very important figures and leaders were killed, and so the leadership of the Hussites was, I'm going to say, fractured, because they were all united on like you could say like a negative vision, which is basically, kick the German out, kick the German Catholic dominance out, which was the kick Sigismund out. That was sort of their uniting principle. But you did have these two factions, which were, as I mentioned, the Taborites, which were the more radical element. This would be what Jan Žižka would be leading. There would be like a council of four, which the Jan Žižka was like the heads or see. I don't know. It's a bit complex. I can't the system how they worked it out, but they would be mainly rural peasantry, lower middle class, Czechs and Moravians, and they'd be more. They would be, their sort of land was mainly in rural southern Bohemia, in and around the outskirts of Prague. They created a settlement called Tabor, which was named after the biblical mountain, hence the name Taborites. They were also known in Czechs, I think it's the orphans. They'd also be referred to as the orphans, so they'd have several names, but they would that would be Jan Žižka's faction, and they'd be the ones that would be more associated by those. That's the one that Marx would like to sort of look at, because they did have like they didn't have like nobility. It was like the way they ran their little villages and towns were like on democratic communes or something like that. So that's how they run. And then you had the hold on a sec. You had there's two names for them. They're known as the ultra quis, or the Kalinaxtism, which was the I think how the Czechs are referred to, but effectively I'll just call them the moderate. The ultraquists, Hussites, basically known as the moderate. They were the moderate ones. Unlike many Taborites, they didn't want complete separation from Rome as a separate church. They were more. They basically just wanted reforms, but they wanted to remain within the biblical structure, the theological structure of the Catholic Church. They didn't object to. It was just indulgences, so, but they were more moderate. They mainly made up of the upper nobility, upper professional class, like the emerging, I guess you would say, like the emerging middle class, in the sense of professional traders and mainly those that lived in the cities, more sort of intellectual types, and also lesser nobility, people who were in minor nobility. What's quite interesting though, Mitch, I couldn't find any examples of like counts or or barons or like any notable figures in Czech at that time who were self-declared moderate Hussites, even Taborite Hussites, which is a lot of them seem to either still claim to be Catholic or what have you, which is, but at the same time, we know that there were a lot of those counts, and I mean, for example, going back to the Kingdom Come Deliverance game, the character which is Hans Capon, the real Hans Capon, wrote a pamphlet defending the moderate Hussite position, even though he fought with um, uh, the sort of crusading Catholic army against them. So it's interesting to see that there wasn't like that top down. It was kind of like a different elite emerged within the kingdom.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I know Jan Žižka, he's low in ability. I'm not. I'll check now without Prokop the Great. I'm pretty sure he was also less in ability as well. Or yeah, you generally get the gist that yeah. So I mean, because most of the top echelons of Czech society weren't really on board with the Hussite Revolution, but then it's also like, well, you generally get this gist of okay, throughout history, any revolution always has a top element supporting it, whether it be that you look up historically and other revolutions where they've had support from overseas elites or whomever, but then the Hussites, it's just like it's like different situations with warlords who revolted a lot but were easily crushed, whereas the Hussites, yeah, I suppose you could say like they formed their own elite.
It
Which
seems to me that a
quite
lot of the, like, you had Divish Borekov, Meltonek, people like, they were like captains in various courts. They did have like some sort of title. They did have lands, and they weren't like unlanded, a lot of them, but um they wouldn't be classed as nobility. They'd be like captains or chamberlains or those in service, like close service of nobility. I mean, for example, Jan Žižka, he was in service of Sophia of Bavaria, who was Wenceslaus's wife, um, as like a as her I think as like her main sort of captain. Um, which is funny because as we get on to see, I'll go to the next bit. You he would end up having instigating revolting against her. Um, yeah, so let's the defenestration of Prague. Um, so Mitch, this was the one I think you were referring to earlier. So I'll just get this one going. So in history, there were three events of this, believe it or not. The second one happened in Kutna in 1483, but the first one in 1419 is, I think, is the one that whenever mentioned in textbooks or referenced, this is the one that most, because it was the first one. So the first defenestration of Prague um, was involving the sort of killing of several members of the city council. This included the mayor and several judges. So this was by a crowd of Czech Hussites, which took place on 30th of July 1419. And this was part of the build-up of, we were talking about in response to Jan Hus and Jerome of Prague's execution by Sigismund for heresy. So a prominent Hussite priest at the Church of the Virgin Mary of the Snows, Jan Zalewski, led a congregation and a sort of public demonstration through the streets of Prague to the new town hall on Charles Square. Town council members had refused to exchange their Hussite prisoners, who they had captured um, due to unrest, previous unrest. Um, it's said that while the march was going on, a stone was thrown at the priest Zalewski from the town hall, and allegedly hit him. Um, we don't know if this was actually deliberately aimed at him, but this is what happened, according to accounts. And this angered and enraged the mob, and in response, they were encouraged. They end up storming the town hall. Once inside the hall, a group of them uh, at the uh, top floor, as we can see in the image there, found the mayor and uh, uh, judge. Um, I think, and also the chief magistrate, who was they called Burgomaster. It's Burgomaster. Um,
Yeah, Burgermeister, which would be like,
Burgomaster.
but yeah, German word for mayor of a town, I believe, because literally means like town master. I probably would be the best translation.
Oh, so that might be the mayor that they're referring to. Yeah, so the mayor and several council members and judges, uh, and they were thrown from the out the window, as you can see in there, onto the floor, and they were all killed by the fall. Because I mean, it doesn't really show, but if you go, there's a friend of mine who went to Prague, took photos of that, and if you actually see like the scale of the fall, I mean, yeah, that would have been a very horrific sight to see, them being thrown out the window like that. Um and you have to remember, at this particular time, this sort of behavior, this sort of action against people who were um effectively, you know, not so much nobility, but they were close enough to nobility, that this was a shocking act. So shocking, in fact, as you mentioned earlier, Mitch, that Wenceslaus, after hearing the news, was so stunned, shocked, apparently died shortly afterwards, as you mentioned, possible heart attack, um, in response to this incident even.
Yeah, I suppose I just crack up a cheap joke about the Czechs having a good tradition of chucking people out windows. So whenever you're in Prague, don't go near the window.
Yeah, don't go near the. I mean, they did this 3 times as well. Um,
Yeah, the third time was you could argue was the one that did the most destruction in the long term. You could argue.
yeah. I mean, that sort of brought an end to the Hussites as a, yeah, political faction as well. Yeah, put an end to them. I mean, at the end of this whole sort of procession, this was a lot. This sort of action was seen also as a discontent within the peasantry and the church prelates and the nobility, and there was also, again, a lot of these people who were killed were ethnically German, so this played into the sort of nationalistic uh, influence. And I mean, Jan Zaleski, who led this one, was very much leaned into, more so than Jan Hus and others, the sort of anti-German sentiment. So there's and he used aspects of John Wycliffe, who you know, corruption within the Catholic Church, to actually sort of tie it in with the corrupt nature of the German itself. So there was it was quite nationalistic. Um, and uh, I mean, after this, it was kind of clear that any sort of dialogue was over. and of course this would lead into the leading action that would instigate the Hussite Wars. So I want to get through because we're an hour in, so we'll try and get through this pretty quickly. So maybe not a good photo I got there. So Mitch, the death of Wenceslaus resulted in further sort of uprisings in Prague, and according to my book here, all of Bohemia was effectively in revolt, open revolt in one way or another. And you had, in response, largely Czech-controlled towns and villages started openly expelling Catholics, Germans, and then this, of course, spread to Prague itself. Bohemian cities started expelling the German population, along with other groups. Mitch, guess who? Yeah.
Oh, you know what's going to happen? Mossad are going to take us down there about now we've involved them.
I mean, how does like well, I won't talk about it. I just find it funny that even like the Hussites who had no interest in them, like, yeah, get them out of here, get them out of here, sort of thing. But anyway, in response, Wenceslaus's widow, Sophia of Bavaria, who was effectively regent in Bohemia, organized a force of mercenaries to regain control of Prague, and which then led to sort of like it led to somewhat of a street battle, which heavily damaged a lot of like the old city of Prague on both sides of the river along the Charles, I think it's Charles the Great Bridge. There was an extensive amount of damage done around the city due to sort of the mob and various fighting. And then both sides, both Sophia and the Hussites, declared a truce on the 13th of November. You did have the moderate Hussites who sort of acted as I guess sort of intermediators between the two factions. So these were town nobles and other high-ranking town officials of Czech descent who were still loyal to the Sophia and the regents, tried to bring a sort of an agreement together to as long as well roping in Sigismund, and I think in response because during this time Jan Žižka took control of the castle at Vasyard, which is like the royal castle.
Vyšehrad.
Vyšehrad, even. Yeah, Vyšehrad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you can't, just for those quick, if you can't pronounce it, it literally translates high castle, so you can call it that for sake of like people in case. The pronunciation is hard because, I mean, I'm looking at the Czech names for a lot of these place names, and I'm like, we're going to end up butchering the Czech language quite brutally by the end of this stream, by the looks of it.
Yeah, it's going to be terrible.
Yeah, I just hope there's no Czech watching this.
Oh, there's going to be one, and he's going to be like correcting everything we say and like pronunciations of this. Ah, so I just want to bring up the. Yeah, so it was agreed that there would be the royal forces would be allowed to return to Vishard Castle, which had fallen into their hands. Um, Ziska, Jan Ziska, who was involved in this, because the funny thing is the garrison of the castle just allowed him to walk in during the sort of early fighting because they were loyal. They were the men were particularly loyal to him, and also being Hussites themselves. So there was he was able to just to capture the castle without even fighting. I think he even sort of pulled a bit of like a Napoleon, just sort of walked up to the gate and was like, "Yeah, let me in," that sort of thing. Um, yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, I mean, you can imagine also he's familiar. I mean, you can imagine pretty much all the soldiers, even like the mercenaries that Sophia of Bavaria took with her. You can imagine everyone's familiar with Zizka to the point where, it's kind of like a Czech version of Julius Caesar, even by reputation, just even at the start of this war, let alone by the time he dies. So yeah, so I suppose
yeah.
you could like, yeah, even just like that, just the fact that he was able to just walk up to like High Castle. I'm just gonna have to call it High Castle. I can't pronounce it in native Czech. Um, he can just walk up to the place, let me in. Entire place just gives up with a fight. It's like kind of like I mean, you can read like account of Julius Caesar, pretty much doing the same with bandits and the like. So so alongside I mean, if you were to imagine it's got like a mountain blade warband character, it's like 100 charisma straight out.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting because the way that this sort of this short time period, a few days, was figured out is Sophia and her mercenaries. They had control over the Prague in the old city, the castle in Prague, around this palace there, and then that's like on the western bank of the city in the northern quarter, and then in the sort of southern quarter where Ziska was, you had the fort there, and they because Ziska didn't at this point didn't want to engage directly. They both basically held up in each other's castles, and there was a bit of street fighting between the mercenaries. And from what I can understand, Sophia held the sort of western bank, and the Hussites controlled aspects of the rest of the city on the eastern bank, the newer part of the city. And a lot of buildings and property was damaged, and then they came to a peace agreement, a negotiating agreement with Sophia and Sigismund, um, where Ziska would basically hand over the castle um, to the royal forces of the Bohemian royal forces, which were still loyal to Sigismund, and technically Sophia, she was regent, so they would have been under Sophia and her council, but in reality, Sigismund. Ziska was not happy about this at all, and he ended up him and his men left, and he retired to a place called Pelzen.
Pilsen. I'm going to have a
Pelzen.
German name for this. Yeah, you know that
Yeah,
Pilsner beer. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm going to have to go for German. I'll go for a German name for that place. I can't pronounce it in the native Czech, so I don't know if you want to default to the German name Pilsen.
I'll call it Pilsen because it's probably easier to pronounce that. It sounds like a German settlement anyway in its conception. So
Yeah, I think that's it's like I mean every place. I'm pretty sure every place in the Czech Republic has its own German name. Like Kutnahora also has Kuttenberg, so it's kind of because there's that strong bilingual character about like Bohemia, like a lot of ethnic Germans living in the area. So
Yeah,
yeah,
Townberg is known in Czech as Townchek, Town or something like that. So
yeah.
yeah. But yeah, he left and retired to Pelsen with a force of uh, sort of Taborite men loyal to him. Um, it's quite interesting because he's sort of described at this point as like a robber baron, which I guess is like sort of like that sort of band he has, sort of professional men at arms, um, currently dispossessed by the weak moderates, um, and restless because of what was happening. He decided to march into southern Bohemia. I think he was. Um, this was around 1420, and he engaged at the Battle of Sodoma. Uh,
I have a feeling we're also going to. I mean, it's got some weird diacritics above E and R, so it's probably pronounced somewhere we can't pronounce it. I'm just going to play it Sudoma or Sudoma. But
yeah,
that's the first pitch battle of the Hussite Wars, and generally sets sort of toning the way for how things are going to go, shall we say, like under Jan Žižka's leadership. Like, because I think it was something like about one battle was like the land freedom, which I believe I mean literally means the land freedom. I imagine it's like a German word for the concept of a militia, and like you probably yeah it was
they were.
a nobles like
Yeah, they were
yeah
called
nobles
themselves.
contractual use of force if he felt there was a rebellion in the area. So in other words, a German ethnic German nobility in the area could use force because of the contract of course social contracts of society back then against him, and so they would conscript the peasants or they get their retinues and sally out for a fight.
Yeah, I mean the commanders. If you just you got Bolslav of Schwanberg, Chuderic of Heydrich, Peter of Sternberg, Micus Divicek of Geminesti, and Hannes of Klorat. So there's quite a few German names in there. The one that sticks out to me is Peter of Sternberg, who appears to be most and Childeric of Heydrich, who seem to be sort of German. You also had the Order of Saint John, like a local Saint John's um, outpost nearby, who also joined in. So yeah, uh, so the Hussites were led by Brennick of Chevalve, who was killed in battle, and Jan Ziska, whose forces, this was their uh, second major battle. Now, the first one was the Battle of Neckmere, where it was. I'll just do a quick run through of Neckmere because there's not really much known about it. It was kind of a short battle, so maybe it's not. It was more of a raid. So there was a raid that caught the Hussite forces besieging the fortress of Neckmere. The Hussite forces were able to break through Boleslav's lines, who was part of that Iron Lords faction that we referred to just a second ago, using artillery, so the handguns on mounted wagons, and this was apparently one of the first documented uses of the wagon fort, as it was called, the war wagons during the Hussite Wars. This resulted in the German nobility, mainly cavalry, quickly retreating with heavy losses because of the gunpowder, and it caused panic among the ranks. Um, um, and this was the sort of first demonstration of Jan Žižka's military power and competence in the minds of Hussites. Of course, the Prague Hussites would later call on Žižka's assistance in defending their town against a crusading imperial army. Uh, Bearing in mind he had history of defeating largely German forces in previous battles. I mean, going back to Sodoma, so this one, which was uh, um, so just to give a quick lowdown, the battle began when the Hussite forces had taken temporary fortifications on the plains, um, who were discovered by Royalist forces, who quickly engaged to attack. The Hussites were greatly outnumbered, almost 5-1. Initially hoisted uh, um, the Hussites initially hoisted the white flag, but when the Royalists refused to accept their surrender, the battle began. Um, Interesting one that. They're outnumbered and comparatively ill-equipped, facing heavy armored knights. The Hussites um, fortified their surroundings, as we talked about earlier. They used the sort of the sort of standard war wagon technique. So there was a flanked around, protected by war wagons, loaded with the armored cannons and hand cannons and um, crossbows. And around them, surrounded, there was large sort of marsh. It was quite a marshy area around the plains. So um, the cavalry, the Royalist cavalry, were limited in their crossings. So 300 Knights Hospitaller from Strakonice, led by Yoldric of Heydrich, who attacked the war wagons placed on the slim uh, dam. Uh, this was resulted in huge casualties for the Knights Hospitals, including where Yoldric was killed in the battle. Um, After that, another 400 Royalist cavalrymen, led by Peter von uh, Konigsbeck of Steinberg, also rushed in a weakly held, sort of tried to find a weak sort of area within the Hussite formation, all adjacent to marshy ground. Um, they dismounted in this, because they actually dismounted in order to progress, but then were more or less stuck within the confines of the marshes, and um, uh, this sort of led to their downfall. And Peter was again, like before with the other chap, was also killed in the battle. Hussite light infantry equipped with falaise were easily able to finish off the cavalrymen disorganized and stuck. The battle ended with the advance of a night and fog, during which Cisco and the Hussite force were able to escape. Though the Catholic Royalists were not entirely defeated, the fact that the Hussites were able to inflict such a heavy casualty with so few men and then escape soundly proved to be a great victory. Only 400 Hussite farmers and townsmen, including women and children, beat the 2,000 strong force of heavily armored cavalry. Hussite General Jan Žižka, through superior knowledge and tactics and terrain, along with the highly effective deployment of wagon fort strategies, won the day. Um, so that's quite incredible. It was effectively the war wagons. They were able to sort of decimate the 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 forces there. Mitch.
Yeah, I was just I was just catching up. And yeah, it's like it's like you seen like some of the details of where it goes. Oh yeah, the Hussite infantry themselves, so they're purely an infantry force, outnumbered, but something like 5 to 1, and of course Hussite infantry having to deal with a heavy cavalry force. Now, generally in medieval warfare, it's generally accepted. Oh yeah, if you've got a purely infantry army, let's say outnumbered like that by heavy cavalry, it's generally but a small infantry force are screwed, and yet Jan Žižka was able to turn it. I mean, both sides suffered heavy casualties. Like three of the 12 war wagons were destroyed. So on one hand, Jan Žižka had room to improve for future engagements. But after that point, the Hussites knew, okay, this is how we ward off the enemy when they do it. Because of course, all these later Crusaders, they've got all the resources. They've got all the Germans. Well, they've got, and you've probably got Italians. You've probably all manner of people all over Catholic Europe who wanted to put an end to these Hussites. They're going to also have a lot of resources, a lot of money. They're going to get some of the they've got plenty more resources than the Hussites could ever have. So
Yeah, I mean, what's incredible is, again, there's a few videos online. You can look at like Bohemian castles, medieval castles, and maybe it's due just to the wealth of Bohemia that was built up before the Hussite Wars, but the castles themselves were incredibly, not just in the beauty of it, but they were incredibly fortified on hillocks, on hills, and so it was kind of like these were really, really difficult difficult places to attack from. Um, and so there were like you had instances where they were able to hold out, and I mean even Prague itself, the walls of Prague, were strong enough to hold out against siege. So yeah, I mean while this was happening, of course, the death of the childless brother Wenceslaus, um, Sigismund inherited a claim to the Bohemian crown. But the problem was, though, there was a question that I think it was a bit later and this sort of arrived with him as well, was the Bohemian crown, whether it was hereditary or an elective monarchy. And there was that effective problem of which is which, because it wasn't really at this point, it wasn't, well, thanks to Charles, it wasn't hereditary. It was more of an elective, quite similar to the Holy Roman Empire model. And also the other notable thing is that Sigismund was already king of Hungary, and so the League of Lords and other Czech lords weren't happy. Moravian, the Margaret of Moravia, weren't particularly happy that the idea that he could inherit all of that, have a sort of strong dominance, balance of power in Europe, and all that. But having said that, though, Sigismund had accepted that the Kingdom of Bohemia was elective monarchy, and he was elected by the nobles, and thus the regent of the kingdom. There's a figure here called Seneca of Wartenberg, also explicitly stated that Sigismund had not been elected as a reason for Sigismund's claim to not be accepted. So they're basically saying, well, we didn't elect him because we were frightened of the implication if we didn't, but they wanted him to go through the official process of going through the elective monarch route. But yeah, he had no problem. And of course, because he was a strong adherent to the Church of Rome, at this time, Pope Martin V, who issued a papal bull on the 17th of March 1420, proclaiming a crusade for the destruction of the White Cliffites, the Hussites, and all other heretics in Bohemia. Sigismund and many German princes arrived before Prague on the 30th of June at the head of a vast army of crusaders from all parts of Europe, largely consisting of adventurers attracted by the hope of pillage. They immediately began the siege of the city, which had, however, soon to be abandoned. Negotiations took place for settlement of the religious differences. So, united, the two Hussite factions formulated their demands in a statement known as the Four Articles of Prague. Um, and this was like the wording for the contemporary chronicle was sort of phrased by Lawrence of Brezova. So this is the following four articles. So first, the word of God shall be preached and made known in the kingdom of Bohemia freely and in an orderly manner by the priests of the Lord. 2. The sacraments of the most holy Eucharist shall be freely administered by the two kinds, that is, bread and wine, to all the faithful in Christ who are not precluded by mortal sin, according to the word of disposition of our Saviour. So just a quick one from that, Mitch. I believe those who were, well, um, like prostitutes, right, couldn't receive, um, you know, holy sort of Eucharist, if that makes sense. So there were certain people who were living life in sin who couldn't receive, you know,
Yeah,
bread and wine.
unredeemable.
Yeah,
Yeah,
bread and wine. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So completely unredeemable at that point
unredeemable. Yeah,
onwards.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, people like that. And the argument was, well, um, um, this goes against the sort of nature and teachings of Christ and the Bible. 3. The secular power over riches and worldly goods which the clergy possesses in contradiction to Christ's precept, to the prejudice of its office and to the detriment, of secular arm, shall be taken and withdrawn from it, and the clergy itself shall be brought back to the evangelical rule and an apostolic life such as that which Christ and the apostles led. So all the wealth and lands and that the church had gained would all be stripped away. So you probably see why a lot of the communists sort of liked a lot of like the communists look back at this and were quite interested.
Like you look up at tabloids, and it's just it's all about all property will be owned in common. That there'd be no servants, there'd be no taxation, so, and all this. So yeah, it's like it's kind of like the diggers as well. So
Yeah, and the fourth clause in this is all mortal sins, and in particular all public and other disorders which are contrary to God's law shall in every rank of life be duly and judicially prohibited and destroyed by those whose office it is. So again, the old adage thing: people in office were previously able to get away with, you know, whoring and other things and murder and yeah. um, uh, I mean, we talked about last time the raid that Sigismund did on Skalitz, where a lot of people, and the attack on Kuttenberg originally in 1403, with and the sort of the looting and pillaging of Czech settlements and everything. I kind of feel that that's sort of a reference to that. That no matter what rank or standing you are in the kingdom, you will be held accountable in this life, at least, for those crimes, which is kind of like a bit of a fu to King Sigismund.
yeah, I think I think he actually also deployed the Cumans again in capacity of this war as well. So you can imagine the Czechs had a long memory of those lot, and the fact that Sigismund was using them again alongside the Germans who were already hated enough by the Czechs. So yeah, you can just imagine that. I mean, to feel like, I mean, the Cumans were technically Christianized, but I mean, as you can see history, like even if people do Christianize, it takes ages for them to dump every single pagan practice they had. So you can totally imagine these Cumans for going back into Bohemia and they'll just rampage and they'll just pillage, burn, they'll just do all the very sinful stuff that no good Christian should do.
Yeah, yes. And I guess, how do you think these articles were received by King Sigismund?
I can just imagine him on Vitkov Hill, just like doing that little wet hand waving thing. Just, well, like just ordering McCumans, just go, yeah, screw this, yeah, ordering McCumans straight ahead.
So I got, yeah. So in in response, just outside the western part of the city, I don't know if it was Cumans. There's one here that said it was Cumans. Others said it might have been German mercenaries, but I think it's Cumans. They basically rounded. They presented a Hussite prisoner opposite, just outside the Sigismund's camp, outside the western part of the city, in front of the all the men, the Hussites on the walls, and they showed this Hussite prisoner who was, I think he was a priest or something. And it says here that the Sigismund's men, which could be Cumans, tied him up, mocked them, saying that yeah, basically mocked them, called them all sorts of derogatory terms, and then set him on fire, basically, and did like burnt him alive in front of all of them. So and I think that was sort of like a response to that was the official response to those demands. But I don't think Sigismund actually uh, uh, I mean, ultimately he rejected it. There was, you had the was it papal legate who declared that these four bits were prejudicial to the authority of the Pope. So basically saying that they were trying to usurp papal authority in church matters, which gave him greater authority into this crusade. Yeah, so in response, the just to give you the sort of the lowdown of what's happening so far. So let's bring up the battle, shall we? So Vidkov Hill. Okay, so on March the 1st, 2020, so I'm just going to skip all that because we just talked about that.
Yeah, I suppose you can say so the precursor of his battle was, of course, Sigismund's army showing up. I can't think of Ostrava River, I think it was called, or something like the river near Prague, with all his siege artillery and stuff ready to besiege Prague, and yeah, and
yeah,
I believe like one of
quite
the first. Oh, I was just gonna say. Believe that one of the first opening phases of a siege was so he tried to get his siege artillery across the river to a more advantageous position, like to like a hill, which later becomes Vitkov Hill. And one of the first moves was that the Hussites were actually able to pretty much destroy most of the siege artillery Sigismund had deployed. So that was kind of like a big FU
yeah.
straight out from the outset.
Yeah, I'm just trying to ping up a map of Battle of. I want to bring up a map of the city and everything, just to give a. I can just do a. I can do a sort of walkthrough. I mean, before of it, you had the Battle of Benazov, which was near Kuttenberg or Kutnahora, um, and there was a small skirmish on the outskirts there, which resulted in a retreat by the Taborites. Um, it is worth noting, though, that during this time period, Kutnahora, which was largely German anyway, remained in Catholic loyalist hands. There wasn't like uh, any notable um, um, on the ground Hussite uh, in the city itself, like Hussite movement in the city itself. The Hussites would later capture it by force, but it was largely German, and it became the seat of Sigismund while he was in Bohemia. This was like his sort of base of operation for the Crusades and also Sophia of Bavaria as well. This would be, you know, where she would head to. Um,
Yes. Yeah, I
I'm
thought.
trying. I'm trying to find a map, and I cannot for the life of me find. All it's showed me is like bloody American maps of like a Civil War, the U.S. Civil War. Um, I might have to. I might have to use. I might have to use Google Map, which won't be accurate, but will. Uh, uh, yeah, I might have to use Google Map. I'm afraid. So it's awkward because there's a few places named Vidkov Hill in the Czech Republic today. So it's like it comes up with like multiple places that.
Um, I think if you want to see where it is, after the battle, they renamed it to Zhizkov, so you might have to put in that to find it because it's east of the city of it's east of Prague Castle, so it says. So I don't know if you have to put in
Yeah.
Zhizkov instead.
Okay. Um. Yeah. Anyway. Let me hold a sec. Let me just. I might just use Google Maps to do this. So. Um. Right. This bit here, if you can see on screen, everyone, is imagine this area here is your old city of um of Prague in 1420, right? Effectively, where this bit of motorway is here is it marks the roughly where the old wall would be, um, and then up here where you have Vidkov Park here, this is where Jan Ziska and his men were camped out. So they were camped outside the wall. Now, over the other side of the river here, upward of probably the Royal Game Reserve here, this is where Sigismund was camped, again outside the wall. And as you mentioned, Mitch, you know that by the burning of the chap took place somewhere around here near this bit here, was just outside the actually I think it was oh around here, the gardens, large Strafoff gardens around here somewhere. Yeah, and so what happened was, um, overnight, Sigismund army came across here. There's no bridge here at this point, so they had to come across like a ford. And early hours of the morning, um, Ziska spotted them at the top of the hill here. And the reason he held this position outside the city was the road networks that came into the city via here. It was important to keep them open, and keep supplies into the city, make sure that they couldn't, um, starve the city off. And in response, if I just go back here to the battle. Uh, yeah, so it dominated. So Vikov Hill dominated areas east of Prague, overlooked the roads needed for Crusaders' supply lines. The fortification on the hill made it primarily from timber, and the walls reinforced with stone and clay, and moats dug around the base of the hill. On the southern part of the hill was a freestanding tower made from timber, and the remaining northern flank was covered by a steep cliff. Traditionally, the fortification was said to be defended by Ziska and only 26 men and 3 women under his command, but it was probably higher than 60 or more soldiers, mainly probably from his own. I was saying from the original battles in southern Bohemia, the same group of people with him. Uh, According to J. Durdick, it's unclear if Ziska was on the hill. The men on the hill were armed mostly with guns and flails. On the 13th of July, the Crusader cavalry crossed the river Voltava. Voltava? I think that's how you pronounce it.
I thought there was a letter I. Seems like a letter L, so it's like but yeah, I hate the Czech language.
Yeah, I have no idea. So sorry, Czech viewers. And began their attack on the outer ring of the fortifications. Vitkov Hill was attacked by a detachment of Austrian and Mesian cavalry under Heinrich of Eisenberg. I really wanted to say Isengard, but anyway,
Yeah, I was thinking that same.
Eisenberg.
Yeah, to be fair, God back in Old English used to mean the same as Berg, so
Heinrich of
imagine.
Eisenberg. Yeah, he was governor of the Mesians. So the Mesians were the German region within the Bohemian crown lands. They effectively they were Saxons. They were the same as like the Saxons in Dresden and everything. Same sort of people. Um, uh, he was governor of the Mesians. An hour before sunset, the horsemen advanced from the south towards the hill. But the terrain and the fortification of the hill forced them down a narrow path and prevented them from utilizing their greater numbers. The tendency of defenders held the attackers off for some time, but the heavily outnumbered Hussites were slowly pushed back. Shortly thereafter, reinforcements from the garrison of the new town broke off and headed towards Vidkov Hill, outflanking the knights and attacked through the vineyards on the southern slope. Trapped between the counterattack and the steep cliff on the northern slope, the Crusaders quickly panicked as they were forced off the hill and began to rout. As they retreated, many knights drowned in the river, in the Voltava River. The battle was clear victory for the Hussites. The Crusaders lost between 400 and 500 knights. In honor of the battle, Vidkov Hill was renamed Zikov, Zikov after
Zhizkov,
Jan
yeah.
Zhishkov, after Jan Zizka, as a consequence of the Hussite victory at Voltov. The Crusaders lost any hope of starving the city into submission, and the army disintegrated. And there's a monument, and if you want to go visit the hill today, and the same place. Sigismund and his troops then held the castles at Vishard and However, they soon capitulated, and Sigismund had to withdraw from Prague. And as I mentioned earlier, that he withdrew to Gutenberg, and just began local sort of warring with the rural Hussites in that region, from that base there. Again, yeah, what he was able to do was, it was a quick action from the Newtown defenders, who basically did a surprise attack from their rear and caught the Catholic forces, the crusading forces, on the hillside, from the vineyard, and completely outflanked them. Which was, it was quite smoke and mirrors, the way that Ziska played his warfare. He gave deceptive, numbers on the hill and everything.
Yeah, so you could, I wasn't on the understanding that the battle was actually a lot bigger than this, given that it had that overall big implication of chucking the Crusaders back to point.
Sorry, Mitch.
I'm pretty sure there was one point where it looked like he was desperate, but then there was like a but there was a reinforcement of something like 80 odd Hussites from the city, as you said, came in from Newtown, struck the Crusaders in the rear, and many of them drowned in the Vltava, how you pronounce it.
Yeah. I mean, it was, and the funny thing is, during this, as a result, a legacy of this, the Taborites, for the meantime, became the most powerful faction, in the wake of this, like the most dominant faction in Bohemia, because of the militaristic prowess of Jan Žižka and other figures. And the moderates were sort of left, I guess, somewhat, I don't want to say demonized, but they were sort of sidelined a bit, because it was like, well, who needs to negotiate at this point? We've defeated the larger force. You guys are, your guys are kind of wet, and this did become a theme where the Taborites there would be like internal factions within the Taborite movement, and more sort of heresies would come of it. You had the emergence of the, like the new version of the Adamites, which were like kind of like a mental Christian sort of faction, formed from the Taborites. But yeah,
Yeah,
the
it's kind of
problem.
like a victory disease. So like they become a lot more victorious, and it massively ups their confidence to a point of hubris in the long run. Which,
Yeah, and the problem was, because there wasn't like a centralized authority in all this. It was all, basically led on the sort of legacy of Huss and his network. The problem was, as it mentions here, that they didn't really know how to fully, sort of capitalize on their victory from the First Crusade. And priest Jan Zeliski, who orchestrated the defenestration, the first defenestration. I mean, he obtained, basically almost ultimate authority of the lower classes of the townsmen, in Prague, but it also became quite sort of a demagogue sort of, system, and he didn't really. It wasn't like he was able to bring peace or stability to the city. And as I mentioned, you had the Tabor became the Taborites and Tabor, their settlement location they built became like this communistic commune and this communistic movement. Uh, and you had these offshoots like the Adamites, who were then suppressed by Ziska internally, but you had this sort of breakdown of factionalism. And it kind of reminds me what happened with the left wing factions in the Spanish Civil War. They ended up sort of turning on each other, particularly like in Barcelona. What was it? The anarchists and the communists ended up fighting each other.
Yeah, even like the communists were fighting each other, like the PLUM, like the Trotskyites going up against Stalinist types. Yeah, so it was like internal divisions already.
Yeah, similar sort of thing. It was um and I mean there wasn't much time, because then within about a year, so 1421, a second crusade was called against the Hussites, and it was mainly a German army entered Bohemia in August of 1421 in northern Bohemia, and they laid siege to the town of Zatek, or in German it's called Saz, which is in the Saarland of what would be the Saarland of Germany, of Bohemia. I think their commander in this was called by the commander in this was known as Pippo Spanio, which was an Italian magnate, a general and a strategist, and in King Sigismund's court. He was of from the Republic of Florence. He was a friend. I think he was quite a friend, and he was also a member of the Order of the Dragon, which was like a Hungarian knightly order of some sort. Or, he seems to be like a professional, quite a professional mercenary, quite a competent mercenary. He put down rebellions in Bosnia. I think he also fought against the Turks on a few occasions. Yeah. Oh, he was at the Battle of Necropolis, the against the Ottomans. So he was yeah, he's been with Sigismund for quite some time. Okay, Mitch.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought. Okay. Yeah, and during this time, Sigismund arrived back in Bohemia at the same time, took possession of the town of Kutna-Hora, but you had the Battle of Nemeki Brood. So I really apologize for butchering the name. And this took place outside of Kutna-Hora, aka Kuttenberg, and led by Jan Ziska and the Hussite besieged the army of the Royal Crusaders. The Roman Catholic Crusaders were no match for the Hussites at Kutna-Brood, who quickly taken and sacked. More than 500 mercenaries drowned as they fled across the frozen Svalza River. During Ziska's dealing with the Crusaders, part of the troops invaded the town, burnt down almost the entire town, and killed about 1,000, 2,000 inhabitants, which was like most of the population at this time. And this was on the road to Kutna-Hora. This was in 6th of January, 1422. As a result, though, the Crusaders lost Kutna-Hora to the to the Hussites and Yanisisca's forces, which was quite a big blow because this Kutnahora was like the one German-dominated Catholic stronghold in the region, which was
Yeah,
lost.
yeah. So like on one hand, because I mean, there's also like a famous painting or some sort of picture where it depicts called King Sigismund having to be routed from Kutnahora, which would have humiliated him, but also because Kutnahora, I think it's silver mines in the area, so you can imagine the Hussites have killed two birds with one stone. On one hand, they've now got access to a lot of resources now, but it's also a matter of they've also humiliated. So they've got like a big morale hit with that one victory, yeah. And it's that Nemetsky Broad, going off what Google Translate says, so it literally translates as German ford. So like Ford River, so yeah, it's I, I might so yeah, I might just default to that rather because I mean so it looks like it's pronounced Nemetsky Broad, which yeah, it's long yeah, which as it just vindicates the whole oh yeah, like many place names in Bohemia named after Germans, even like small features like oh yeah, little village at a ford, just like a major river like that Vltava or however it's pronounced. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going with that.
I say, Mitch, I know we got there's like more like a third and fourth and fifth crusade. Um, what I might do is I might call it a night in a minute, and we'll do it another those ones in another time. Third and fourth and fifth crusades, because there's
Yeah, it's quite. I
quite a bit of
mean,
detail.
yeah, and it's like the later aspects of a war are quite.
Different sort of thing.
Yeah, you can imagine maybe like you have to probably use an hour's worth just to well, at least half an hour to an hour just explain like oh yeah, all the different factional interests within the Hussite clans that sort of come home to roost in the later end of the 1420s, early 1430s when some of the Hussites are more when you have, of course, a moderates who are more open to compromise with Sigismund, whereas you get the Taborites who, as mentioned earlier, they kind of have this victory disease where they get very hubristic, very resistant to compromise, and they actually become the one who everyone unites against at some point further down the line. So you can
Yeah,
imagine.
I mean, the loss at Kutnahora, as you mentioned, yeah, there was the silver mines, predominantly silver mines, and this silver was used by Sigismund to pay off the Hungarian nobles, other people in his realm, even the Cumans, largely to pay them off as well, pay the Cumans. So this was like a devastating blow because this was a big cash cow for him that was gone effectively. Um, and this would, I mean, during this time, uh, there was a period where Bohemia was kind of free of conflict. The Hussites were in some form of control, and there was a short free period of time where there was no foreign intervention. Um, but of course, as we'll get onto in the future episode, it would then the two Hussite factions would turn on themselves, which was kind of inevitable, I think, at that point.
Yeah, and it's like I suppose like I don't know best to phrase it properly. Like, yeah, you just genuinely just that either moderate or sides. Yeah, you can imagine towards the latter aspect, like latter phases of a war, because I mean, of course, Bohemia can't hold it indefinitely by itself. I mean, it's landlocked. You know, they might be materially rich in terms of like gold and silver and all this, but at the end of the day, look, completely surrounded. Yeah, they can't hold
Yeah,
it long term. So it's
and
like a
they
right.
do. Yeah,
Yeah,
and the moderate faction, the Hussites, I know this, and as we'll see in future, they'll look to the Poles and the Lithuanians for alliances in even installing a Polish duke onto the throne of Bohemia as a way of securing that sort of guarantee that assurances there.
Yeah, it's like I suppose obviously was well. I mean, on one hand, like you, as was said earlier, you get the whole pan-Slavic vision of Jan Žižka, because of course he fought at Grunwald, even though actually it might not have actually fought like with a sword or whatever. So that kind of
Yeah, that you see. I mean, but this is sort of where you go into the pan-Slavic nature of Czech and Polish nationalism. Um, but yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I've got we'll probably call it a night now, Mitch. So thank you everyone for watching, checking us out. We'll do a part 2 to this another time. We'll talk about the rest of the other Crusades, and also the aftermath of all this, and um, the legacy. I mean, because this did create an interesting legacy. Because overall, the um, Sigismund, when Wenceslaus died with no heir, Sigismund only heir was his daughter, who married Elizabeth Luxembourg, who married into the Habsburgs, and by default, the Habsburgs would then acquire. I mean, they had the Archduchy of Austria, but they would acquire the Kingdom of Hungary, Bohemia, Croatia, and so on, which of course plays a big important part in future world events going forward to the 20th century. So it is all kind of connected back to what happens here, um, and it is like the fall of the House of Luxembourg, and the Habsburgs come in and swallow it all up. And um, I believe Albert, or one of the Alberts of Habsburg, was involved in like before the Hussites. He was involved in like various rebellions um, against Sigismund. He was sort of like involved in some aspects of that.
yeah.
Or I think he was always involved in kidnapping Wenceslaus. I can't fully recall, but I know that he was involved because you had the inevitable border disputes between the crown lands of Bohemia and Austria. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, because it was you had Albert II of who took over, of course, and she over a lot of the big titles like King of Hungary after Sigismund died in 1437, 1438, somewhere around that time. Because of course,
yeah,
House of Luxembourg. Oh yeah, they're kind of. I mean, it's like that saying goes, the light that like the star that burns brightest burns half as long. So that's kind of like House of Luxembourg in a nutshell. That you have Charles IV, who rules pretty well and he's remembered fondly, but then his sons just kind of knack it all up. And the only like living scion of that dynasty is a daughter who, because of the nature of dynastic politics at that time, everything she has gets signed over to the Habsburgs, and the rest is history as far as because the Habsburgs are. I mean, there's a reason why they're very well known, including like, of course, is it Edward? I forget his first name. The Hungarian ambassadors of the Holy See. So yeah,
Eduard von Habsburg, yeah, the Hungarian ambassador. Who you see, yeah, he's um yes, he's in his book he talked about this, like the basically it was I mean the Habsburgs call it the hubris of the House Luxembourg, who two brothers who hate. I mean, they did hate each other. It's kind of obvious they really didn't like each other at all, and both their sort of greed and everything, it brought both houses. They both that brought the house down, and the Habsburgs were able to come in and mop it all up for themselves. And um, I mean, even he admits that it wasn't accident as such, but it all happened. It all happened rather too easily for them.
yeah, and as one was said, that such as rest of history, like they dominate the Holy Roman Empire from until, of course, 1806, when we have to. So we pretty much dominate that part of Europe for a long time, up until end of the First World War. So that's kind of how consequential the fall of the House of Luxembourg really was to Central Europe, with Sigismund
Yeah.
and so on. That,
I mean,
you know,
also another way to look at it is it also strengthened, because at that time, the Piast dynasty of Poland had largely, by that point, I believe, was somewhat extinct, in the sense that because you had the Lithuanian, what they called the Geminids. I forgot what you call. I forgot their
Gedimids, I think it was.
Gedimids. Yeah, had the Grand Duchy of the Grand Duke of of Lithuania had married the Queen of Poland, and in doing so, he converted from paganism, Lithuanian paganism, to Christianity, Catholicism, and this began the it wasn't, at this point, people get confused, because it wasn't the act of union, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth at this point, but as a result of the Hussite conflict, it forced Poland and Lithuania to be more, the nobles to intertwine with each other, to be like a bulwark against the German states in the west and the Holy Roman Empire, but also the Teutonics in the north. And ultimately, the legacy from that would be the official. I think over 100 years later, so in the 1500s, you had um, the actual act of union between Poland and Lithuania as one political entity. Um,
Yeah, I think it was around 1444, when because Poland had an interregnum after Władysław died at the Battle of Varna, because he was also king of Hungary, and then Poland, after that, they chose the Lithuanian dynasty Jagiellon or Jagiellon or something like that.
yeah, which was an offshoot of the Geminids, Getamids. It was an offshoot branch of the Getamids, but they were effectively half Lithuanian and half Polish. Yeah, so
Yeah, and it was
yeah,
like, so you had like 115 years, or 125 years later, you then get what we call today the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth, kind of like similar to how, well, it's a very similar dynamic to how England and Scotland were in de jure terms united, but only de facto terms in 1707. It was like 100 years after the Stuarts ascended the throne. That,
yes.
yeah, we actually, so yeah, it's very similar dynamic to that.
So yeah, similar dynamic, and also you can see that in Spain with Castile and Aragon as well. Sort of back and through, sort of technically united, but not officially until, what was it, 1700 or something like that. And of course, the other big legacy from all this, the Hussite movement itself, was the influence that Martin Luther and the Luther, which was ironically, because it was sort of a quite German nationalistic in some ways, and um, the Lutheran movement spread within the Germanic world, in Scandinavia, and would go on to dominate northern Western Germany. And from that, you would have the creation of the Prussian state, as we would know, um, Prussian identity. So it's quite, it does all sort of lead back to those events in Bohemia, in some way.
Yeah, it's like, I, 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 I mean, I think this tune's ended up going to give me inspiration there for me to go on EU4 and just play as a Hussite Bohemia, because I think better patch where you can actually play as the Hussites in Bohemia, or you can play as Bohemia and bring back the Hussites. So yeah, but I mean, I don't know, but like Bohemia, because I mean, I not too knowledgeable about history before, but I know, like, for example, in England, right? I mean, I've made this argument in the past where I think John Wycliffe, but you also have this general history where England was always going to go Protestant, or at least like very aloof from Rome. And I suppose you can argue the same with Northern Germany and Bohemia. Although Bohemians are atheistic these days, other Czechs are very atheistic these days, so I don't know. But yeah, it's
Yeah. I mean, it's quite ironic because there is actually Connor at Plotline has showed me there's like this has been recently with like the more like right wing parties in the Czech Republic, or the sort of revival of the more sort of radical right. There has been like a revival of Catholicism in the Czech Republic, in some areas, like so. But there hasn't. There is. You do have like a Hussite church in the Czech Republic, but it's not as prominent. I mean, they have like high attendance on national holidays, sort of thing. But I don't know. Yeah, it's strange. It's not. Um, I would kind of compare it to like state Shintoism, like with Japan, to be honest. At this moment in time, it's like it on the Czechs will use it as like a national rallying cry, like they did in the revolution against the communists. But yeah, I mean, it's not. Apart from that, there's not much with it.
yeah, you can't really compare it to Anglicanism in the same, because I mean Anglicanism was more born out of Henry VIII rather than a sense of national, like rather than some sort of like rather some. I mean, the Hussites, you could argue, were very grassroots, along with some like local nobility backing. But yeah, whereas Anglican Church, yeah, was born out of very different reasoning.
I
Yeah,
mean, effectively, it was born out of the king not wanting to stay married to his Spanish wife. So yeah, I mean, it's and to be honest, I mean, the Anglican Church itself, if you actually look at the declaration, it wasn't like we're separating from the ecclesiastical or the theological difference of Rome. It's basically, instead of the Pope being the supreme authority of the Church in England, Henry VIII declared that he was the supreme authority of the Church of England. So it wasn't. I always say the Protestant Reformation in England wasn't really a reformation as such. It basically opened the door to it. Henry just said, okay, all the church lands and property, and it's all under my control. And then you had like Protestant, I'll not say infiltration, but you had, because it wasn't under the remit of Rome, that the Protestantism was able to rise up in the lower in the lower aspects of society. And that's when you had like I don't know if you heard the term low Anglican and high Anglican. So the high Anglican would be more Catholic in nature, and the low Anglican churches would be, which is basically like your average village church, is more Protestant sort of.
I suppose that'll be the roots of a Puritanism that you get with Cromwell and so on.
Yeah, from the low church, and the sort of uh, not really liking the idea of the various ritualistic elements of the high church. Um, but I mean,
Yeah.
one thing that is, I actually found a really interesting stat here before we go. So during the Hussite Wars, it says here that 90% of the Czech and Moravian population were openly declared themselves to be Hussites. I don't know if I believe that number though. That does sound like a very high number, but at the same time, given this widespread revolt and the sort of like anti-German sentiment and how far it's spread, it could be a real thing. I mean, I don't know how I mean, some of the accounts here of how like the Czechs were treated, like it was straight up, they were shut out from like aspects of local government by Germans, like merchants and stuff. So, um, and also Sigismund and Wenceslav, but were very unpopular. I mean, Sigismund was a very unpopular ruler, so it could be true. It could be true, 90%.
Yeah, I won't be surprised if that's actually true, because it's like, I don't know, you take a look at the English Civil War, where let's say you have, like, you take a look at the map when the Civil War was declared. So, for example, my area was strongly royalist, whereas let's say down in East Anglia, for example, complete opposite. Now, yeah, you might have had like isolated individuals who would go against the grain, but the vast majority, but yeah, you understand, like, the map is that way because the vast majority of people, like, I don't know, 80 or 90%, would have sided with the relevant sides, so to speak. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Hussites were actually massively popular. I would have thought it'd be more like something like, I don't know, 70 odd percent, to be honest, because I mean, I say you can imagine there was also intermarriage between the Czechs and the Germans, so it's not like, oh, all Czechs and Moravians were inherently hostile towards the Germans, but you can imagine maybe strong sort of cauldron of resentment just boiling over
One
into
of the
this.
one of the Hussite commanders, I think it was Prokop, or what was the person called Prokop. His mother was German, but his father was Czech. So yeah, I mean, and he was a prominent Hussite. So in that sense, there were, you did. I mean, from what I can see from this stat, the Catholics were mainly native Germans and Poles living in Bohemia. But a lot of Germans fled the kingdom during the Hussite Wars, and wouldn't return until, um, well, about a century. I think during the time of the 16. So when was this? Yeah,
I
so
mean,
30
yeah,
year
I mean,
wars.
yeah, Bohemia was fully under Habsburg control after, well, after the 30 Years' War. So you can imagine, like, mid 17th century onward would be where you get, of course,
Yeah,
the Sudetenland being so heavily German
yeah.
up
I
until.
mean that remained heavily German, but like the German population in Württemberg and places in like the southern Bohemia never fully recovered, and on a sort of larger scale. Um, in Very interesting thing is, also when the Habsburgs took over, another group returned to Bohemia. So, um, so yeah, it all worked out well for everybody in the end, I guess. So. Yeah.
I will not comment.
I've actually been searching that group and what because I am curious to see like what were they not doing during this time period, like who were, and to my not surprise, they were financing Sigismund and other people, so that might explain why they were expelled from by the Hussites as well. So it's
I was going to say something, but I don't want Mossad to strike down the stream just as we're about to end it. So,
No, I was going to say I'm going to go on a helicopter trip tomorrow, so I definitely don't want to say anything that will get me lost in the fog. So yeah.
yeah,
No, anyway, on that note, thank you everyone for watching. We'll do a part 2 next time. Thank you for Mitch for joining me, and I will see you all next time.
yeah,
Stream.
yeah. Till